the thing with AI is obviously it's unbelievably powerful and it can be a great thing. But trust in content is being eroded. Is this written by a human or AI? These social channels and this influencer thing, the trust will be eroded. Is this a real person even, or is this just an AI thing? So,
welcome to T Talks, the podcast where we break down the journeys of game changers, innovators, and leaders transforming industries and communities alike. It's more than just success stories. We dive deep into the experiences, challenges, and triumphs that define their paths. At T Talks, we dive into the stories of the leaders changing our world. I'm your host, TJ Walia.
Today we've got a phenomenal guest with us. His name is Ian MacDonald. He's a Chief Marketing Officer at AutoTrader. He's dedicated his entire career and life towards marketing. Award-winning, phenomenal. Ian, welcome to T Talks.
Hi TJ, thanks so much for that introduction. Phenomenal. That's a very kind word of you to use about my career. Thanks for having me.
I looked at your profile, your history on LinkedIn, and it speaks volumes. So I figured you'd be the phenomenal and best guest for us to have and showcase some of your experiences that you've gone through in your career. So let's jump in. Why marketing?
I suppose at the very beginning of my career, it kind of wasn't marketing. In school, I enjoyed mathematics, but I also liked things like English and more kind of creative endeavors. But my first job out of university was an actuarial assistant. So I was training to become an actuary, which is pretty hardcore level of math involved in that. But number one, it was incredibly hard. It was like a different level from what I'd been doing in my academic career. And number two, really felt like I wanted to do something that kind of combined, I love working with numbers, and really there's only one thing that really does that in the kind of modern business landscape, which is marketing and advertising these days, because obviously it's heavily involvement from the digital side of things and ROI calculations, and you have to be very, very numerate to be effective in marketing these days. Which wasn't the case, 30, 40 years ago. So it's only got more so. So it's really been the perfect kind of career and discipline for me to spend so much time on, just because I have sort of both sides of that coin, fortunately.
Amazing. Ian, marketing's evolved so much over the past 30, 40 years, like you said.
Sure.
It's not the way, conventional billboards and advertising. We've gone to digital. What's the role of a CMO today?
Like a lot of titles, they seem to have, there's a far less kind of common definition of any title, I find, in business as the years go by. It really differs based on the organization, the size of the organization, and frankly kind of the maturity of both the organization but also the marketing practice. I mean, you will find folks who are pretty much purely running Facebook and Google advertising, and they have the title of CMO. That's okay. In the organization that works. And listen, those things are extremely complex topics. Like expertise in those channels is not an easy thing whatsoever. But on the other hand, you'll find in other companies, maybe they're larger, a bit more mature, doing things in a more sort of multi-channel way, the role of a CMO becomes a hell of a lot broader. You have to have an understanding at least, but really be effective and make difficult decisions about things as diverse as, PR campaigns, which are hard to measure and things like that, through to TV and audiovisual creative, through to, yes, being comfortable being in a spreadsheet, really crunching numbers and kind of figuring out ROI. But the way that I think about the role of a CMO myself is, I think it is the role that should be advising that the shareholders of a company, whoever that might be, and the shareholders and the owners of a company and the CEO, they should be advising how much to spend on investing, I should say, how much to invest in advertising and marketing, where to spend it, and when to spend it as well. I think that's a critical thing that sometimes is a bit misunderstood. There are times where it makes more sense to spend a lot more or a little less or the same, and there are times where it makes sense to change up, something that's been working maybe for many years, because something is kind of causing that change. So that's really the role of the CMO. In many companies, many successful companies, advertising and marketing is one of the biggest, I call it investment line, a CFO might call it an expense line, but it's one of the biggest investments you can make, and it's one of the biggest actual indicators of how successful the company is going to be. So really the role of the CMO is to bring the expertise to the table to say, this is how much we should spend, this is how we should spend it, and here's what we should expect in terms of ROI and time horizon for that ROI.
Amazing. And given the digital evolution of marketing, we now have a way to measure a lot of that ROI. Historically, you put a billboard out, you have no idea who saw it, didn't see it. it was just an investment in per se. With these tools now, has marketing become more simplified, or is it now more complex given the landscape of Facebook ads, Google ads, and everything else that's come in?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, because it's kind of has a two-part answer. In the short term, understanding the short-term effectiveness of channels as they become sort of more digital, it has become easier, and it's become easier kind of on the face of it. What I think a lot of people didn't see coming, maybe including the industry, but certainly marketing as a discipline and senior marketers, what they didn't see coming was that would actually be a bit of a poison chalice. Suddenly, because there are some channels where you can see the short-term ROI and impact that they're having so clearly, obviously from a business owner and a CFO perspective, there's more pressure to go in that direction. And actually, that's kind of been the story, I think, over the last maybe like 10, 15 years, is you've had massive migration of advertising dollars over into digital. Ironically, kind of forward-thinking marketers are actually waking up to the value of some of those traditional channels. Now, there are technologies and methods where we're getting a better sense of how to understand the effectiveness and the ROI of those more traditional channels, but it's always going to be more challenging than digital. I think the best way to kind of say it is that not everything that can be measured has value. You can get lost in a sea of KPIs, often only 2 or 3 of them really matter. And not everything that has value can be measured. Something like PR, like I say, I've always been a big believer in PR. One of the reasons is that it's one of the only, marketing mediums where it's not the company's voice saying, our product is great, we're great, you should use us. It leverages insights and great relations with the press and people like that, so that it's a third party saying to the audience, they're great, you should use their product. Right. So PR has that uniqueness to it, which is why I've always been a big believer, but it is very, very hard to measure the effectiveness of it just because of the nature of it.
Of course. So if you had to, you talked about KPIs, if you had to pick one KPI that you were to, I guess, bet the bank on, what would that one KPI be if you were to look at getting your ROIs?
Well, I guess it would be ROI, wouldn't it? Or as close as you can kind of get to it. Obviously, never advise anyone to do that, but if you really had to boil it down, if you just to say that you could only ever see kind of one metric, I think it would be something higher up in the funnel. It would probably be something like consideration. How many of the target audience would consider using your brand? If you only had one, that's probably the thing you'd want to measure, because everything you're doing is really trying to do that.
Thank you for that response on the KPI aspect of it. If you were to now look at how the landscape of marketing is changing, especially with Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, it's really taking a shift to personal branding. Do you see that as a leverage for the organizations to now funnel their investments into influencers? Or do you see that as almost like a threat because you have no idea where this influencer is going to be? Their alliance is technically just on where they're getting their paycheck from. So how do you see that? Is that a threat? Is that an advantage? I
think influencer marketing has a role. I think its role is probably less broadly applicable than the industry has given it credit for. I don't think it works for every single brand in every single situation. Certainly there's a few kind of interesting aspects at play with the influencer side of things. So I think the first thing is around organic reach. So going back 5-10 years, an influencer would have their own audience and they could post and they would reach that audience organically with pretty good kind of penetration of their following. These days I think it's down to like 3-4% or something. Even when a brand posts on Meta certainly, I'm not sure about TikTok, but when they post, maybe only 3 or 4% of the audience will see it unless they pay to boost that post. That's one thing to say. The whole influencer thing is you've got to pay the influencer to create the content, and then really you've got to pay to then boost that content so that people actually see it. So that's a whole new thing. One of the things that's interesting about influencer marketing, and I mentioned it a moment ago, originally it's a version of PR. I mean, it really is, because like I said, it has that uniqueness that it's not you saying my product is fantastic or my brand is fantastic. It's a third party, a trusted third party. In the case of influencers, it's an individual. In the case of PR, maybe it's a news outlet. I think social media has actually kind of leapfrogged traditional PR, is that they have to be much more transparent and disclose when it's a paid sponsorship and when it's a paid kind of advertisement. You don't find that so much with the public relations and PR and press side of things, because people trust newspapers. Even if not that it says advertorial, because it's true PR, they're covering it because you've generated an insight or you've generated an angle of interest. It's interesting how influencers have kind of at a bit of a disadvantage because of that transparency that they're kind of forced to adopt, because they're rarely going to post or talk about a product or something purely because it's interesting, whereas traditional media outlets would.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. It's and it's an interesting space we're getting into now, especially with AI avatars and AI acting as those PR channels. There's faceless channels, as they call them, on Instagram and TikTok that are just promotional content. So, I mean, this world is changing. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is that an avenue? Is that something as a CMO you would look at and say, is this the avenue we want to go with? Because those faceless channels, yes, they have a following, but they might not have the same connection as an individual or an organization or a brand does.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think it hits on one of the kind of oldest, most long-standing challenges for marketers, which is around trust. And the thing with AI is obviously it's unbelievably powerful and it can be a great thing, but it's a bit like content. Earlier, like Web 2.0, years and years and years ago, like content was the thing. People were producing content and blogs and things. Now AI can do that. Now Google and other search engines are trying to wrestle with, how do I decipher AI content from human content? Because I can't reward AI content, because you and me could set up a website in 10 minutes and have 10,000 articles live. It's just like, so, trust in content is being eroded. Is this written by a human or AI? These social channels and this influencer thing, the trust will be eroded. Is this a real person even, or is this just an AI thing? So, they say there's nothing new under the sun, but I think it just speaks back to that thing of, I don't think it helps, because it could erode the trust that people have in advertising and content and what they hear, period. And listen, that's not just digital, as we know. The general public these days have less and less trust in their institutions, even in their governments. So trust is a challenge for advertisers and marketers to overcome. And I think AI could be dangerous when you try and overcome that.
Yeah, and I think it already is getting to the point where it's becoming dangerous. There's been a lot of cases where there's been a video of, say, the Prime Minister or the President posting something out there, endorsing something, which they've never done, all AI made, and people are going out and purchasing or putting their money behind certain investments. As marketers, how do you distinguish between something that you've done as an organization versus something someone else is doing to give the organization a bad name now? Because you're almost in a firefight, essentially. Because if someone dislikes a brand, they will create content with AI just as strong, just as powerful as what a whole PR agency or an organization's marketing department can do. How do you put up with that?
Well, I think it's a huge challenge, and I'm not sure if the industry has the answer. I don't feel like I have the answer right now. But look, I mean, you could see a world where, in traditional kind of crisis management and crisis comms, like something bad happens and it's in the press, and you work with your agency and you add context and kind of counter things, and it's moving so fast now. You could have one of those a day. If there was someone who had a dislike to a brand and they wanted to use AI to hurt that brand, they could be creating daily content.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I'm really not sure. I think it's something that as an industry we should be thinking about, though.
Yeah, and I've had conversations with many, especially on the governance of AI, right? Because it literally could be a PR nightmare for any organization. It could probably make or break them, depending on how significant that messaging gets portrayed. Because people are not going in and digging deeper to say, is this really a representation of that brand, or is it face value? I mean, listen, I'll tell you, my dad sends me 500 things on WhatsApp every single day, thinking they're all true, right? So I'm going back and saying, no, these are not. And there are not many of us that actually go that one level deeper.
Yes.
Right?
I think that's demonstrable.
Yeah. And so what can people be doing, right? Because to trust a brand, because it's all about trust, as we said, as you've mentioned as well. What can people do more to understand that the messaging or the misinformation that's coming out, is it really misinformation, or are we validating it?
Well,
and I don't know if you have the answer for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have the answer, but but I was just sitting here thinking, I mean, we're talking about brands and things, but really, I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. Like what you were saying, where it gets much more serious is the government stuff and what people believe around that. From a brand perspective, I think, truthfulness is an important part. I would say of any brand, but I mean, certainly, you know, for the brand which I currently work on, AutoTrader, like trust is an absolutely pivotal part of the brand positioning. We talk about it, it's published, everybody knows that that's very, very important to our brand and the way it resonates with people. So, you know, folks within the organization will make decisions with that in mind, which any great brand positioning should live throughout the whole organization. You know, I'm not sure if that's right for every brand, but maybe it kind of needs to be in the future, is that they all need to be thinking that way and in the way that they act and the kind of things that they put out there. Because I guess you can only control what you can control, and you can be consistent and kind of make smart decisions around your own brand. You can't control what's going to happen out there so much.
Absolutely.
But you can try and set yourself apart by, and that's back to the thing of like, if you're doing an awful lot of influencer marketing and this becomes a bit of a sort of misunderstood world where people aren't sure what's real and what's not, do you want to be doing that activity? Because it's like half real, half not, and I don't know, is it better not to do that? I'm not sure.
Well, and you know, historically, just from the influencer side, you could control the agencies you worked with and that represented you. But now, today's day and age, you can have an influencer who gets arrested for something, right? And now they're tied to your brand.
Yeah.
How much control do you have over that? That's risky business, if you think about it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you know, I remember years and years ago when I started my career, one of the brands I was working on, we had a spokesperson who was like a kind of comedian in the UK. It was a car insurance brand, and I think he got in trouble for drink driving, something like that. And it was a big thing at the time. It was like, oh God, you know, the spokesperson of the car insurance brand is actually drink driving. But in that case, it's like, they made a bet. Okay, the guy made a mistake. But you're right, like suddenly if we're going to have this kind of army of ambassadors, there's no way you can background check all of them, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think most of them get a background check.
No.
You know, and I've seen a lot of influencers that put out some of their media kits, and all they talk about is these are the numbers, this is who our reach is, but no background, no information, no context. And I don't think a lot of agencies are doing that due diligence to understand who are they really working with.
Probably not. Given the volume of influencers now, is it even possible? Right? They're like networks of influencers. Absolutely. Tens of hundreds of thousands of them, maybe.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Mentorship. I know mentorship plays a big role. We talk about that in most of my guests that we bring on as well. What kind of role has mentorship played in your career and your life?
I think it's more important to have the right mentor. So, you know, for anyone who's thinking about that or looking at that, taking your time is really important. Because you get the right one, it's game changing. You get one that's meh, then it's a bit of a waste of your time. And then you get one that maybe gives you not the best advice, that can be damaging. So, yes, it's definitely played a role. You know, there's two or three people in my younger career, and even now that I kind of, you know, stay in touch with and go to for advice and things. And increasingly, you know, I'm finding, you know, you're getting a bit older when people start approaching you to be a mentor. Oh no! But I guess, I mean, I've been doing marketing for 20 years, so it makes sense. But no, I think it's a great thing. You know, the other thing I would say is that sometimes I speak to folks and, you know, they'll say, oh, my mentor is this person or that person. The other thing that's really important is it's got to be someone who's actually in a position to have some effect. It's got to be someone that has some sway and can actually have a meaningful impact, not just someone who you kind of think is cool and they're like a couple levels above you and you have a chat sometimes. That's not really mentorship. That's more like a colleague.
Exactly. And so from that aspect, you know, you touched on a few things. Be very selective, be very deliberate on who you're mentoring or getting the mentorship from. What are the 2 or 3 things that people should look out for when they seek a mentor?
So number one thing is someone who's done what you want to do. So that's the other thing. I mean, have a clear idea at least. I mean, it can change, but at least have an idea of how you want your career trajectory to go and where you'd like to be. It's a cliche question, but for a reason. It is important to have some sense throughout your life of where you want to be in 5 to 10 years, and it can change. Listen, mine has changed a few times, but it's good to be having those thoughts and think it through in your mind, because it will lead you to, well, let me find someone who's done that. Let me someone who's trod that path. So that would be the first thing. And then, as I say, sort of secondly, someone who's still in the game enough to actually have some positive influence over your own trajectory. And then, like I said, third thing I think is just kind of relevancy, I guess, because that same trajectory could work in very different ways. Even this, you know, an example, like if you're working on online digital brands and your mentor is more of a CPG type of person, you know, that's not quite the same sort of path. That those things work differently. So some kind of high degree of similarity, I'd say.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And I think, it all starts with that self-awareness. If you don't know where you're going, what mentor are you going to find?
Yes.
Right? So really doing that homework and understanding what your skills are, what your abilities are, what your gaps or opportunities are. One of the things I do every 6 months is I'll actually I have a big whiteboard in my basement, and I'll go write down all the things I've gained or skills I have, and where I want to be, identify the gaps, and then go seek out the right mentors who can actually help me bridge that gap.
That's fantastic advice, man. Yeah, that's the right answer. Yeah, yeah, no, that's definitely part of it. That's the other thing. Self-awareness is huge in career progression and success. Self-awareness is becoming rarer and rarer and rarer, I find, as the years go by. And it is probably the most important thing. You've got to understand what you need to develop to be great before you can be great.
Well, the devices we have, we're always connected. Our brain doesn't get time to rest up. I remember, I think you're probably in the same generation as I am. Growing up, when we were driving, there were no devices or distractions. So you were focused on the road, but it gave you time to go into deeper thought, especially on a longer drive. I used to love that aspect of it.
Yeah.
You don't have that anymore. There's so much distraction that are coming out now.
Like, back in London, that's a heavy kind of commuter type city, and I used to commute in every day. Back in the days we went to the office every day. That's how long ago. But yeah, I mean, sometimes depending on where I was living and working, it was an hour and a half each way. And yeah, we had MP3 player, but you get a bit bored of it. And back then they only held about, whatever. Yeah, exactly. A few hundred songs. You get a bit bored of it. And maybe you had a book or whatever, but you're right. You had so many opportunities in the day to pause and think quite deeply. Not just travel, but other times as well. But you're right, like now there is no respite. There is always,
you're always on.
A billion things to look at right here in your pocket constantly.
Absolutely, and we'll sit down even if we're waiting for something. It's like you pull out the phone and see what's going on. We're constantly drawn in by these devices. There's the documentary that was on Netflix. I don't know if it's still around. The Social Dilemma.
Oh yes.
The Social Dilemma. If you've seen that.
I have seen that. Yeah.
Absolutely love that. Once I saw that, I actually turned off all notifications on my devices. Right. Try to maintain as much control as I can. They still pull you in. It's ridiculous how they're designed this way.
Yeah, I found, I mean, actually, LinkedIn was the worst. I removed the LinkedIn app from my phone just because it was the notifications.
That's how I found you. I'm lucky I still got through.
Well, but that's the thing. I do visit LinkedIn, but purposefully.
Right.
So, when I'm working at my desk during the day, I'll hit LinkedIn, at some point in the morning for 10, 20 minutes, see what's going on, and then towards the afternoon. But when notifications were switched on the phone, I mean, it was constant. And some of them I was looking at, I was like, that's not even really a notification. It was just, one of your 5,000 connections just posted something. Thanks. That's not really something I need to be notified about, So I found that their approach in particular was really heavy duty.
Well, from a marketing perspective, they're brilliant. As soon as that message comes up, they create curiosity.
100%.
And that curiosity is just enough to say, who was it and what did they post?
Yeah.
Right. And then it pulls you right in. So they've done enough research to understand that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I obviously, like I say, there is a level where you can kind of abuse that privilege of users. But you know what? It's not that new. It's just like email now and email back in the day, right? There were always those rules about how many emails you send, and some brands would go too far, and then your unsubscribes go up. You've got to call off. I think it's the same thing with the notifications. For me personally, I found they were kind of abusing the privilege I'd given them to have some real estate on my phone and interrupt my day. But for others, well, like LinkedIn junkies, I guess they love it, and that's fine, and they want that many notifications. But
no, absolutely. So, one piece of advice that changed your perspective about marketing that you might have received in your career at some point. Anything comes to mind?
Piece of advice. Well, speaking totally honestly, and this is something I still think about and kind of try and work on. When I was quite a bit younger, I guess, I got some advice from a leader who said to me, the thing about you, Ian, is you always want to do what's best for the business and the brand. He goes, and that's good, but you really need to think more about the balance of doing the things which are going to help you with visibility and leading to promotions and how you're thought of in the company and all that stuff, and the kind of gristly stuff that no one ever sees or really cares about, but it's for the good of the business and you need to do. And I still kind of wrestle with that a bit these days, to be honest with you, because there's an awful lot of things that I will devote time and energy to, and they're things that have to be done, and they're for the good of the business kind of thing, but you don't get thanks for them. And sometimes that can feel a little difficult, right? But anyway, that was an interesting piece of advice, I think. And I think it is good advice. It's important to balance things because, as much as, it may seem like a virtue, being one of those unsung heroes, which there are many, many, it's not a great thing really for your kind of career and also for your self-esteem. Like every now and then it's nice to sort of, I feel like I'm doing the right things, but if you're consistently not getting recognition because you are one of these kind of unsung heroes who's not a be seen, be heard person, and you do all the stuff that really needs to be done, but you don't do or don't get to do so much of the visible stuff, it can have an impact on your mental health and self-esteem, and therefore your productivity and effectiveness down the track. So trying to strike balances there, that was a piece of advice I got that at the time, to be honest, I didn't really take on board. 3 or 4 years later that I thought, you know what, they're right. Yeah. The balance is really important. So that would be one piece of advice.
Yeah, I know it's, my career, 15 years at Microsoft, one of the things that a lot of people that I saw struggled with, including myself, was every time you have that performance review, your leadership is asking you to fill it out and say, tell us what you did right, what are the opportunities? And that self-assessment becomes very difficult. And we usually look at some of the negatives or focus on the negatives and not the stuff that we've done well. So it's a big challenge, as you said.
We're very often being told it's team and team effort and culture so important, and that's true. That is very true. But then it's odd. The way we do reviews a lot of the time is we sit down at the end of the year and say, "Right, this is about you and you only. What did you do?" And it's like, "Whoa! That's a paradigm shift. Context switch. 1 minute I'm part of this team and everything we do is together, and then I have to sort of, do I take credit for that because we did it as a team?"
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a bit funny the way that we, in business culture generally, the way that we say we want people to work and then the way that we reward and assess them is pretty different.
Yeah. No, it's true, and that's exactly what it is. And we would actually see the shift in, so at year end, you would start seeing emails going out where people are, quote unquote, helping others because now they want to showboat or highlight that. And you can see right through it.
Yeah.
Right. So it becomes difficult. But for a lot of people, they don't like to do that, or they can't do that. It's just out of their comfort zone. So you'd end up seeing the people that are the loudest get the bonuses, the promotions.
That's what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
So
very often.
Let's look at that. If you were to restructure the compensation model or the recognition model, what would that look like? And I don't know if you have the answer for this one, but I mean, maybe we can brainstorm something together on this. But what would that even look like? Because to your point, you're recognizing individually, but you're asking for that team player to be there.
I think there should be far more emphasis on peer review. So, in every business we do the 360s, right? I'll find out, where the development points are and what's good and stuff. But I find that rarely forms the basis of something meaningful, aka, your remuneration or whatever it is. It always seems to come down at the end of the year to, does my boss think I did a good job? And I think that maybe balancing out, because don't get me wrong, the leader's opinion is important, of course it is. Maybe trying to balance that a bit more with more peer input on how this person has performed, so that those kind of unsung heroes that we spoke about, the people in the team know who's doing the real gritty work that maybe they didn't want to do or that was tough or whatever. So I think that could be a good development to kind of rebalance that a bit. Also, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I think certainly at certain levels, I think more transparency over salaries might be a good thing, because sometimes there can be really large disparities. Sometimes there are reasons for it, longevity, tenure, sure, that kind of thing. But it is one of those aspects of business that remains very, very guarded in almost every business. No one really knows what each other is kind of making, and that can cause resentment and things like that as well. And again, it runs a bit contrary to what a lot of businesses say they want to do culturally about openness and transparency and merit and fairness and stuff.
That's an interesting perspective on the salary aspect of it, especially with the tenured employees. There was a lot of conversations around the water cooler where they're saying, oh, the new guy came in at 10%, 20% more than everyone else, right?
Yeah.
And they don't know it. It's just something that someone threw out there.
It's even worse than actually knowing.
Exactly.
Hearing it and not knowing.
Exactly.
At least if you actually knew it was true, you could.
And then it pisses off everyone else.
Yeah.
And your best employees are now annoyed because they think this is it, and no one's willing to answer that. They're not willing to ask anyone that. And if they do ask, they're not going to get the answer, right? So I think there definitely needs to be more clarity on that. And they usually say, they're within this range, And that range could be about a difference of $100,000.
Sometimes the salary bands are big, yeah.
Yeah, so no, absolutely. Sometimes those salary bands can be huge.
And but you know the other thing is, and I mean, I guess we're straying outside of kind of my expertise, but it's interesting. So let's talk about it anyway. I'm not sure why sort of businesses don't. I mean, they know what the recruitment costs are, right? And they obviously factor that in. HR departments do factor that into what they offer people and how they want to stay and stuff. But generally speaking, the advice that's given to younger people I see a lot these days is if you're not getting substantial salary increases every 2 or 3 years, change job. And look, it's a fact, you do tend to get those jumps because the recruitment market is always a bit ahead of the actual market. So if you're changing jobs a lot now, it creates a bit more of a complication, I think, to your sort of efficacy and your abilities, because especially in marketing, sometimes it actually takes 3, 4, 5 years to understand the impact of the things that you do, particularly in brand marketing and offline marketing. You're just not going to know if something worked to the full degree within a year or 2 years. The model that kind of incentivizes people to keep moving and moving and moving, maybe that's something else that's sort of worth businesses thinking about a little harder, because if someone's competent, you're going to have to replace that person. It's going to cost. So should we be letting people kind of, switch jobs 2, 3 years, or should we be incentivizing them to stick around?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Typical organizations, your salary increase every year is anywhere from 1% to 3%. That's kind of the range that they go with. If you're lucky, you get to the 4.
Yeah.
But you switch jobs, you're looking at 10 to 15% easily. Yeah. If not more. Right. So to your point, this is why people are jumping. But the employees that are performing, I think they should be rewarded accordingly as well. Yeah.
I mean, you would hope so, right?
Yeah.
But particularly in big businesses like Microsoft. I mean, I've spent some time blue chip. I worked for Royal Bank of Scotland in the UK, which is like Microsoft. It's tens of thousands of employees type thing. And actually, to be honest with you, one of the reasons why in my career I have gravitated to more like medium-sized companies like AutoTrader. I mean, there's a few reasons on the marketing front, but even just from a kind of business standpoint. In those bigger companies, it is really hard to stand out and not kind of be viewed as a cog, because everyone's a cog in this massive machine.
Absolutely.
And you have to get so high to actually be on the radar of level where they would try and retain you or not want you to leave, because no matter how good you are, it's just not feasible in that size organization that they're going to know the difference between TJ and this person and this person and this person. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's just not possible.
Absolutely. So. No, it's definitely not. And even within those organizations, I mean, I've had various different roles at Microsoft. Because of the sheer size, you live in a box. And you cannot go outside of those boundaries, because those boundaries belong to someone else. So either you have to get approvals, permissions, or whatnot. But for the most part, you live in your box, essentially, from a day-to-day. So that opportunity for innovation, that opportunity for creativity doesn't exist the same way.
Right, makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. Well, Ian, we're going to shift gears again.
Okay.
Our next segment is the rapid fire segment.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Whatever comes top of mind, that's what you respond with. Quick, short answers.
All right.
You ready to go?
Quick and short. Okay.
All right, let's try this. First one's easy. Tea or coffee?
Tea, every day, all day long. Tea.
Well, you're British, right?
Of course, yeah. That was easy.
Favorite car brand?
Someone asked me this the other day, and I say Ford, and they're always surprised when I say Ford, but I love Mustangs.
Next question, morning or night person?
Morning person, I think.
Okay. What time do you get up at?
I've got 2 young kids, so about 6:30 a.m. Okay. Yeah. I get woken. I don't get up.
I was going to say, so it's morning, not by choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Digital ads or traditional marketing?
What a great question. I built my career, in the first half of my career doing digital, and then I've added the brand strategy and other pieces. I think because honestly it's more challenging these days, I'd say traditional, because it's more challenging, and we like a challenge. So yeah, these I'd say traditional.
Okay. Yeah.
So both is the real answer.
Both. Well, you have to. It has to be combined. Yeah. Gary Vee or Seth Godin for your go-to advice?
Oh my word. I think Gary has a lot of qualities, but since he runs a major media agency, I've seen him say a few things on stage about digital media, which is kind of not quite sort of made sense. So I'll go with Seth, I guess.
Seth. Most inspiring book for marketers?
Most inspiring book for marketers. There's been a few good ones over the year. Yeah, I think that How Brands Grow was really influential. Obviously, everyone knows that in the industry. It completely, it's kind of completely changed the way we thought about loyalty and reach and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a fabulous book that everyone should kind of read. But maybe it doesn't kind of qualify as a book, but certainly the long and short of its study by Burnett and Field is that's essential reading as well. And I mean, I know that's getting like 10, 15 years old now, but that was a game changer as well.
Amazing. Favorite marketing campaign of all time?
When I look at something like Pepsi or Guinness, because they've been so consistent and so right on with the brand positioning, I kind of view the entire lifetime of all the advertising that they've done as one campaign.
If animals could speak, which one would you want to have a conversation with?
My instinct would be to go with something kind of old and wise. So like a tortoise or something that's been around for 100 years.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure. I love the conversation. So thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me. And TJ, really brilliant questions.
Yeah,
so
no,
thanks
absolutely.
very much, dude.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. Until next time, keep on inspiring.